Hello and welcome back for another Torah Tuesday. It's the best day of the week. Today I'm going to talk with you about Exodus chapter 3 verses 7 through 9. And in these chapters, God has been with Moses at Sinai, at Horeb. He's spoken to him in the burning bush, and that scene is still playing out. And God says to Moses something that should have been really good news to him. Moses is someone who has demonstrated a concern about the plight of the Hebrews in Egypt. And now God lets Moses know that he is aware of their suffering and he's come to do something about it. We're told in verse 7, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them. Now this phrase, come down to rescue them, should be a little bit of a flag for us. It should remind us, it's a hyperlink, as Tim Mackey would say, a hyperlink to other parts of Scripture. And we've actually talked about this phrase already in a previous video. So you may remember that in Exodus chapter 1 we have the same phrase, and both of these allude back to the story of the Tower of Babel, or the city and Tower of Babel. I just read an article by a gentleman named David Smith where he talks about this allusion and develops its implications. So in Genesis 11:4, the people say, "Come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly." And then they say again, "Come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we will be scattered over the face of the whole earth." So their point in building the city was to prevent being scattered. It's possible that what they're building is a military fortification with probably a temple inside. But David Smith wonders whether what we're seeing here, because they're all speaking one language, whether this is militarily instituted conformity, whether we're actually looking in Genesis 11 at an oppressive situation. And God's response to that is really clear in verse 5 of Genesis 11. But Yahweh came down to see the city and the tower. So he came down. There's really vivid language about God coming to investigate this situation. So then in Exodus chapter 1 verse 10, Pharaoh echoes similar fears that the people will spread out and leave his land, just like the people in Genesis didn't want to be scattered all over the earth. Both of these concerns actually fly in the face of God's instructions in Genesis chapter 1 to fill the earth. God always intended for his people to spread out so that they could fulfill the creation mandate wherever they live, and that they can represent his rule all over the earth. And so the desire to consolidate power and to keep it in one place actually runs against what the human vocation is supposed to be. So Pharaoh says in Exodus 1:10, "Come, we must deal shrewdly with them," and it's that same "come, let us" phrase in Hebrew. And he begins to implement policies that are anti-life and anti-creation. The Hebrews had been proliferating, flourishing, and he tries to clamp that down and tries to keep them contained in his land. So based on what we know of Genesis chapter 11, David Smith says we should anticipate already that Yahweh is going to come down and do something about these oppressive policies that are trying to keep the people contained in defiance to God's instruction to spread out. So it should come as no surprise in chapter 3 verse 8 when God says that he has come down to rescue the Israelites. Now there are a couple of other connections between Genesis 11 and Exodus 1 and 2 that I mentioned in a previous video. Briefly, the city and Tower of Babel are being built with brick and tar. And in Exodus chapter 1, the Israelites are building with brick and mortar. And in Hebrew, the word for tar is chemar, and the word for mortar is chomer. So same consonants, different vowels, they sound very similar. Chemar and chomer. So then Moses' mother coats the outside of the basket where she places Moses, this little ark, She coats it with chemar, just like Genesis chapter 11. So there are several reasons for seeing an echo between Genesis 11 and Exodus 1 that should set us up to anticipate what happens in chapter 3, verse 8, when Yahweh says, I see what's going on here, and I've come down to do something about it. So Babel sets us up to understand how Yahweh responds to the consolidation of earthly power. He's not for this. And Smith says a city built in this manner cannot be allowed to stand unchallenged. We see that in Babel, and now we're seeing it in Egypt. And he also says to identify a project with Babel is to prophesy its demise. That's what's happening in chapter 1 with these allusions or hyperlinks to Genesis 11. And he concludes, God's descent results not only in judgment on and dismantling of Egyptian oppression, but also in the creation of new historical possibility, of a way forward within which God's intentions for human community might just become visible again. Have a great week.